At this year's September 3rd military parade ceremony, there was a long absent figure standing atop Tiananmen Gate, wearing a faint, almost breezy smile. Once upon a time, he was the iron-fisted party enforcer who struck fear across China's political elite. A man spoken of in the same breath as Xi Jinping under what was known as the Xi Wang system. Once upon another time, he fell from grace. Those around him were purged, one after another, until he was left alone, an isolated survivor. Today, he appears like a knight who has already washed his hands of blood and retired from the Zhenghu, as if everything on the political stage has nothing more to do with him. That man is Wang Qishan, the former secretary of the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. There has long been an unresolved mystery in today's Chinese political world. How exactly did Xi Jinping and Wang Qishan, once inseparable allies, end up breaking with each other? Today, we are going to talk about the causes and consequences of the rupture between Xi Jinping and Wang Qishan, and about how Xi Jinping gradually moved to discipline and restrain this old friend of his. The friendship between Xi Jinping and Wang Qishan spans almost the entirety of their lives, starting from their sent-down youth days. The two once slept side by side and talked through entire nights. In the early stages of their professional careers, both served under Du Runsheng, one as a formally appointed consultant at the Rural Development Research Centre, the other as its liaison director. In their youth, both were active within princeling circles, often dining and drinking together, exchanging experiences about political careers. At critical junctures in their official advancement, Xi Jinping helped Wang Qishan strengthen his ties with Zheng Qinghong, while Wang Qishan helped Xi Jinping improve his relationship with Zhu Rongji. After entering the Standing Committee, the two jointly planned an unprecedented anti-corruption storm and together climbed to the pinnacle of power. Wang Qishan helped Xi Jinping establish himself as the unchallenged core leader of the party, while Xi Jinping helped Wang Qishan get elected vice president of the state, extending his political life. Had things continued in such peaceful harmony, their revolutionary friendship could have been written into textbooks for children to study. However, history is never a fairy tale. Behind these affectionate stories, the seeds of rupture were quietly sown. In January 2017, after nearly 5 years of the anti-corruption storm, and in the final year of Wang Qishan's tenure as CCDI secretary, he was still at the peak of his power. Yet, several things happened that year which, in Wang's eyes at the time, seemed insignificant, but which now appear to us to have been deeply consequential. The first was that capital tycoon Zhao Zhenhua was escorted back to the mainland from Hong Kong by Sun Lijun. Although Zhao Zhenhua was highly adept at maneuvering among China's top elites, in Wang Qishan's view, he was merely a minor figure, someone with whom he had never had direct dealings and thus not worth much attention. As a result, Zhao Zhenhua was placed under the control of another department. What Wang Qishan did not anticipate was that Zhao Zhenhua was the primary bribe giver to his chief aide, Dong Hong. How primary was that? Zhao had transferred roughly over $500 million to Dong Hong overseas. Zhao's logic was simple. I've fed you well enough, so don't take money from anyone else. This quietly laid the groundwork for Dong Hong's eventual downfall. The second event was that Guo Wengui began making explosive revelations overseas. This time, Wang Qishan did not take things lightly. After several failed attempts to have Guo extradited back to China, Wang sent his trusted subordinate in the Ministry of State Security, Liu Yanping, to the United States to negotiate with Guo. What was supposed to be a secret negotiation ended up being recorded by Guo Wengui and released publicly across the internet. The third event was that, starting at the end of that year, H&A Group encountered a liquidity crisis and entered what would become a death spiral. However, H&A's chairman Wang Jian had not yet realized this. At the time, he was still preoccupied with acquiring dangdang.com and planning to purchase a Swiss hospitality school. Naturally, Wang Qishan himself also failed to realize that his own money bag was already leaking. Yet not everyone was without premonition. Zhou Liang, Wang Qishan's longtime secretary and then head of organization at the CCDI, transferred in November of that year to become vice chairman of the Banking Regulatory Commission, leaving behind the then all-powerful Wang Qishan. This politically astute young man was either planning ahead or had already sensed the coming shift. At the 2018 two sessions, Wang Qishan unexpectedly assumed the position of vice president of the state. Before this, the role was either concurrently held by a standing committee member or assigned to a politically marginalised figure such as Li Yuanchao. For Wang Qishan, this was a mixed blessing. The bad news was that he had previously attempted to continue on as the newly created director of the National Supervisory Commission, only to encounter opposition from multiple forces. The good news was that, as vice president, he could attend standing committee meetings, read standing committee documents, effectively becoming the unquestioned number 8 within the Chinese Communist Party, thereby extending his political life. Xi Jinping also hoped that Wang could leverage his Wall Street connections to establish communication channels with the Republican Party and Donald Trump. However, Trump in his first term was highly rebellious and simply did not buy into Wall Street's influence. The CCP's traditional diplomatic strategy failed, and Wang Qishan's personal network proved ineffective. In March 2018, Trump launched the trade war against China. In June of that year, in an attempt to rescue HNA, Wang Qishan urged Guo Shuqing, then party secretary of the People's Bank of China and chairman of the Banking Regulatory Commission, to convene a meeting of the major state-owned banks, demanding that they continue supporting HNA's development. This conversation was not reported to the relevant supervising leaders and constituted a non-organisational activity. In nature, it was the same as Liu Yanping's trip to the United States for negotiations. Both would later become leverage against them. What was puzzling was that just over 20 days after this central bank meeting, HNA's helmsman Wang Jian fell to his death from a cliff in France, leaving behind a massive mystery. This was likely Wang Jian's fate, and also a foreshadowing of the fate of both HNA and Wang Qishan, since they were, after all, on the same ship. Although Wang Qishan could still attend standing committee meetings and enjoyed the treatment accorded to the number 8 leader, he had already stepped down from the post of CCDI secretary. He no longer directly controlled this massive state apparatus, and the procedures for investigating and arresting officials no longer passed through him. If he wanted to interfere in cases, he could only do so through personal relationships and indirect means. Thus, beginning in 2019, Wang Qishan's power began to decline. There were two emblematic events: the downfall of Liu Xiyu and the arrest of Ren Zhiqiang. While serving as vice governor of the central bank, Liu Xiyu was responsible for liaising with the Beijing municipal government. Because he got along well with Li Xiaohong, the two became close friends, and Liu was subsequently brought into Wang Qishan's circle. Of course, his later appointment as chairman of the China Securities Regulatory Commission also owed much to his Tsinghua senior, Chen Shi. At the beginning of 2019, after Dai Wan, closely associated with Liu and known as the bond market queen, was taken away, Liu Xiyu became a frightened bird, living in constant fear. He therefore sought help from Wang Qishan. In earlier years, Wang could easily have extinguished the CCDI's investigation into Liu, but times had changed. Wang Qishan could no longer control the investigators, though he could still influence the case review office. He thus advised Liu Xiyu to voluntarily surrender. This would allow Wang, through the case review office, to modify the punishment plan. On the grounds of voluntary confession, Liu would merely be demoted to division-level status. At the time of his surrender, Liu Xiyu was already working at the supply and marketing cooperatives. Logically, after demotion, he should have returned there. However, Wang Qishan thoughtfully arranged for Liu to return to his old base, the People's Bank of China. When Guo Shuqing received the call instructing him to pick up Liu Xiyu, he thought he had misheard and asked twice for confirmation. This episode demonstrates that Wang Qishan could no longer, as in the past, simply and brutally shield subordinates from punishment. He now had to take detours, and even then, the outcome was merely passable. The other matter revolved around Ren Zhiqiang. Wang Qishan had been Ren's tutor during middle school. Ren mentioned in his memoirs that Wang would often call him late at night just to chat. Ren Zhiqiang's tendency to speak recklessly was nothing new. As early as 2016, Ren publicly questioned the doctrine that the party's media must bear the party's surname. The Central Propaganda Department immediately organised multiple media outlets to counterattack, and the Cyberspace Administration shut down Ren's Weibo account. At that time, however, Huang Kunming was merely the second in command at the Propaganda Department, and Beijing's municipal leadership was not aligned with Xi Jinping. Wang Qishan was still wielding great power, and Ren passed through unscathed. But in 2020, Ren went too far. He directly mocked Xi Jinping as a clown with no clothes. This enraged Xi Jinping's two henchmen, Beijing Party Secretary Kai Chi and Propaganda Minister Huang Kunming. The former, in particular, had long been searching for opportunities to demonstrate his loyalty to Xi Jinping. In order to show devotion to the great leader, he did not hesitate to offend Wang Qishan. By this point, Wang Qishan was already becoming marginalised and could no longer effectively speak up for Ren Zhiqiang. This time, Ren did not escape the CCP's iron fist. From 2020 onward, the relationship between Xi Jinping and Wang Qishan took a sharp turn for the worse. Misfortune also began to howl through Wang Qishan's faction. Among all these developments, the most shocking was the downfall of Dong Hong. Dong Hong was Wang Qishan's closest brother in arms, his chief aide, chief steward, and principal strategist. He had once served as the student union chairman at Renmin University of China. After graduation, he worked as a secretary to Bo Yibo. After the abolition of the Central Advisory Commission, he followed Wang Qishan from Guangdong onward. When they were in Beijing, the two lived together in Yonghai Jiayuan. The third floor was Wang Qishan's residence, the second floor was Dong Hong's, and the first floor was where the two drank tea and chatted. This arrangement alone illustrates their extraordinary closeness. Dong Hong's style was extremely bold. Especially after Wang Qishan assumed control of the CCDI, Dong, no longer worried about being investigated, became even more enthusiastic about getting things done and making money. It is said that Dong Hong's boldness even frightened his own wife, who spent her days fasting and chanting Buddhist scriptures, praying for protection. In order to settle matters with Dong once and for all, Xiao Jianhua transferred several $100 million US to him overseas. When Xiao Jianhua was first taken under control, Dong Hong and others were not overly worried, because Xiao was being handled by their political ally Sun Lijun. In March 2020, Sun Lijun fell. The person in charge of the Xiao Jinhua case was replaced. From that moment on, Xiao's confessions could no longer be concealed and were delivered directly to Xi Jinping's desk. In the past, Xi Jinping would have firmly believed that Wang Qishan must have been unaware of Dong Hong's corruption at most, a case of poor judgment in personnel selection. He would also have consulted Wang Qishan's opinion because how Dong was handled concerned Wang's personal dignity. As long as Wang Qishan made even a modest plea, Dong Hong would likely have been dealt with lightly. For example, Yang Jing, Secretary General of the State Council, who was also implicated by Xiao Jianhua, was treated leniently after Li Keqiang intervened, receiving only a reduction to ministerial rank. However, a crack had already formed between the great leader and his deputy commander. The great leader had developed deep suspicions toward his once intimate comrade. The starting point of this suspicion was that the overseas revelations and rumours had been submitted to the General Secretary by the Office of the National Security Commission as major overseas public opinion incidents. Chen Wenqing ultimately betrayed his old superior Wang Qishan and used this to prove his loyalty to Xi Jinping. Naturally, the great leader did not blindly trust these rumours. He conducted investigations into Wang Qishan through other channels and arrived at similar conclusions. At the same time, the HNA working group had already been established and related information was being reported to Liu He and Xi Jinping. All information channels pointed to one conclusion. Wang Qishan's situation was also extremely serious. Xi Jinping felt deceived. He had long believed in Wang Qishan's personal integrity and had praised him on many occasions for his discipline dating back to his youth. Amid the shock, Xi Jinping discovered a fatal logical problem. Once Wang Qishan's massive corruption became common knowledge, the entire anti-corruption storm would be questioned as nothing more than a political struggle. If a super corrupt figure led a super anti-corruption campaign, how would the world judge that campaign? The investigation also revealed Wang Qishan's omnipresent heavy hand in personnel matters and other issues. This posed a direct threat to Xi Jinping's power. Xi could not tolerate the existence of another power centre within the party besides himself, especially when bureaucrats within those centres regarded Wang Qishan as their patron. The great leader's fury directly triggered a campaign against Wang Qishan. This campaign unfolded in several stages. The primary task of the first stage was to eliminate several of the closest and most problematic figures within Wang Qishan's camp. The first objective was to announce to both party insiders and outsiders that the anti-corruption campaign had no forbidden zones and that no one, Wang Qishan included, was exempt. The second objective was to complete the separation between the great leader and Wang Qishan, demonstrating that Wang's corruption had nothing to do with the leader and that the leader had not previously been aware of it. Once aware, action was taken immediately. This was intended to salvage the reputation of the anti-corruption campaign and respond to both domestic and international skepticism. In this stage, those to fall first were Kai Esheng, Vice Chairman of the Banking Regulatory Commission, and Tian Huiyu, Chairman of China Merchants Bank. The friendship between Kai Esheng and Wang Qishan began more than 30 years earlier, back when Wang was still the head of China Agricultural Trust and Investment Corporation. At that time, Kai Esheng was a deputy division chief at the People's Bank of China, while the division chief was Jin Jiandong. They had come to the central bank to handle a certain business matter that was not entirely compliant with regulations. Comrade Old Jin did not dare to process it, but Deputy Division Chief Kai handled it quickly and efficiently. From that moment on, the two became sworn brothers. Later, Chairman Kai became a famous trust czar. A single license could be sold for over 300 million yuan, making him the man most feared by Zhengrong Trust boss Ji and by Lu of the Ocean-wide Group. As for Tian Huiyu, he had been Wang Qishan's secretary during Wang's time at China Construction Bank. He was known among party cadres as a stock market god, having invested in CATL and pocketed over 1 billion yuan in profits several years. Earlier, he had already been taken in by another department and disappeared for several days. At the time, Wang Qishan was still in power and quickly fished him back out. This time, however, Tian was not so lucky. In September of that year, after self-rescue efforts failed, the Hainan Provincial Working Group stopped giving consideration to Wang Qishan's face and took coercive measures against Chen Feng of HNA. A generation's business overlord formally came to an end. During this same period, Lu Yanping, the Ministry of State Security Disciplinary Inspection Chief, whom Wang Qishan had dispatched to negotiate with Guo Wengui, also fell because of that non-organisational activity. Meanwhile, Wang Qishan's favoured general, Deng Xiaogang, then Deputy Party Secretary of Sichuan Province, was transferred to the Ministry of Agriculture as a Vice Minister, and marginalised Guangzhou Party Secretary Zhang Shuofu was transferred to the Provincial People's Congress as a Vice Chairman simply because he cut down old banyan trees along Guangzhou's streets. By then, no one spoke up for him anymore. Beginning in June 2022, the campaign entered its second stage. Taking advantage of the CCDI leadership reshuffle, the objective was to clean out Wang Qishan's remaining forces within the CCDI and thoroughly eradicate his influence there. Before this, although Wang Qishan had been away from the CCDI for many years, key central positions such as Director of the General Office, Head of Organisation, and Secretary General were still held by Wang's people. Through them, Wang could still understand how the CCDI operated and even influence its role. To strengthen control over the CCDI apparatus, these individuals had to be escorted out the door as soon as possible in order to welcome the new CCDI secretary and a new round of anti-corruption storm. In July, former CCDI General Office Director Zhang Chunsheng was transferred to serve as Vice Minister of Civil Affairs. That same month, Wang Qishan's writing secretary, Miaoqing Wang, who had once served as director of the CCDI Policy Research Office, was transferred to become vice chairman of the Guangxi Autonomous Region. In October, Wang Qishan's logistics chief, Kui Peng, formerly director of the CCDI Administration Bureau, was transferred to serve as head of the Disciplinary Inspection Group at the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. That same month, Wang Qishan's money bag from his Beijing days, Yang Xiaochao, formerly Secretary General of the CCDI, was transferred to an inspection team and the following year moved again to a special committee of the National People's Congress. Also in October, Ling Ji, head of organisation at the CCDI, was transferred back to the Ministry of Commerce as a Vice Minister. Those found without problems were marginalised. Those with problems were directly investigated. In November, Fan Yifei Wang Qishan's money bag from his China Construction Bank days fell. The following year, Tang Shuangning, former chairman of Everbright Group and known as China's foremost contemporary cursive calligrapher, was also brought down. At the 20th Party Congress, Li Ji assumed the position of Secretary of the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. Under Xi Jinping's guidance, the CCDI launched a second round of the anti-corruption storm. This storm had a latent purpose: to declare that even without Wang Qishan, the great leader could still mobilise a political campaign. Within this campaign, even more problems involving Wang Qishan's close associates were uncovered. The CCDI showed them no special leniency. However, their downfalls were no longer aimed directly at Wang Qishan himself, but rather resembled a dispersed, systematic cleanup by the CCDI. The great leader applied a one divides into two approach. Out of consideration for old ties, Comrade Old Wang could be spared, but anyone connected to him, if problems were found, would still be investigated. No exceptions were permitted. In February 2025, former Hubei Party Secretary Jiang Chaoliang fell. Former Gansu Party Secretary Lin Duo was placed under investigation. In March, former CCDI Discipline Inspection Secretary at the China Securities Regulatory Commission, Wang Huimin, fell. In May, Bi Jingquan, former Deputy Secretary General of the State Council during Wang Qishan's tenure, fell. In August, former CSRC Chairman Yi Huimin fell. At the same time, CICC, personally founded by Wang Qishan, was also purged, with senior executives such as Ding Wei falling one after another. Wang Qishan's closest personal secretaries and relatives also saw their fortunes rise and fall along with his own. When Wang was at the height of his power, they rose with him like chickens and dogs ascending to heaven. Now that Wang's misfortune had arrived, they scattered in all directions, each arranging their own escape routes. The most far-sighted among them was Zhou Liang, Wang Qishan's close personal secretary of more than 20 years. He possessed exceptional political wisdom. Even when Wang Qishan was at the peak of his power, Zhou remained extremely cautious. He was also the first to foresee Wang Qishan's fate and therefore began planning his own future early. In 2015, he ceased serving as Wang Qishan's secretary and instead became head of organisation at the CCDI. In 2017, he jumped to the Banking Regulatory Commission as vice chairman, leaving the disciplinary system early. Zhou Liang's successor, Su Jing, was not so fortunate. Originally a deputy division chief at the Beijing Municipal Planning Commission, he was later transferred to the Municipal Government General Office to serve as Wang Qishan's deputy bureau level secretary, and later to the Ministry of Commerce as a commercial councillor. After Zhou Liang's transfer, Su returned to the CCDI as Wang Qishan's full-time secretary. In 2024, Su was transferred to China State Construction Engineering Corporation as director of the Corporate Culture Department, becoming almost the worst assigned secretary of any standing committee member. During Wang Qishan's time at China Construction Bank, he also had a junior secretary named Huang Chaohui. Huang did not follow Wang to Guangdong, but instead went to CICC, where he served for many years as head of the investment banking division and later as chief operating officer. In 2023, he voluntarily resigned from this position as well. As Wang Qishan's closest little brothers, Gao Jianmin and Hui Xiaobing, also resigned one after another from their positions at Yinjian International, bidding farewell to this private domain of Wang Qishan. Hong Ning was Wang Qishan's nephew-in-law. In 2017, Hong's wife, Liu Xinyang, died of cancer, marking the decline of this great family's fortune. Hong Ning had served for many years as a global partner at Goldman Sachs and was a heavyweight in the investment banking world. In 2019, his final career battle, the return of Zhongwang Group to the A-share market, ended in failure. In 2022, he retired from investment banking and became chairman of Huatai Life Insurance, essentially finding himself a place to retire. This obscure insurance company had many stories tied to him. Despite backing from Tencent and CITIC, it remained loss-making for many years. Yao Qing, the only grandson of Yao Yilin, had long been treated by Wang Qishan like a son. He once rode the waves of commerce together with HNA and was later investigated in connection with the HNA affair, disappearing from public view ever since. As for Wang Qishan's adopted daughter Sun Yao and her husband Huang Yaowen, because they were relatively weak within the family, They behaved more cautiously and suffered less impact. One remained at CICC, while the other served as a vice president at Guoxin, both becoming centrally managed cadres. Thus, a once mighty elite family quietly dissolved from the world. It inevitably brings to mind the final line of Dream of the Red Chamber. Much like birds scattering back into the forest once the feast is over, leaving behind a vast expanse of pure, blank earth. Thank you for watching.